right, hi class, I'm picking up, this is the second part of lecture 2 for July 19th. We just ended with a table. We were talking about the epidemiology of suicide. What I wanted you to take away from that is that suicide is a leading cause of death, overall the 10th leading cause of death for all ages in 2010. So there were 38,364 suicides in 2010 in the United States. That's an average of 105 each day. Now I'm going to go through some descriptive statistics for the epidemiology of suicide. So in 2011, and a nationally representative sample of youth in grades 9 through 12, 15.8% of students said that they had attempted or seriously considered suicide during the 12 months preceding the suicide. 7.8% of students reported that they had attempted suicide one or more times during the 12 months preceding the survey. So among youth, and I hope you got this from the Agurbo article too, there's a very high burden of disease when it comes to suicide. We also see a lot of disparities, racial and ethnic disparities. The suicide rate among American Indian and Alaska Native adolescents and young adults is almost 2.5 times higher than the national average for that age group. As students in grades 9 through 12, significantly more Hispanic female students reported attempting suicide in the last year than Black non-Hispanic female students and then white non-Hispanic female students. So also, if we think back to yesterday's lecture, what we're doing now is what we call descriptive epidemiology, right? I'm describing rates in terms of a person characteristic, that being race. We also see gender disparities. So suicide among males is 4 times higher than among females. And suicides among males represent 79% of all suicides. So 21% of suicides are among women, 79% among females. Now, it's well established that the rates of suicide and suicide-related behaviors increase with age and gender, which is what you're seeing here. So boys are on the top, the black circles, girls are on the bottom, the black squares. And you see that boys are much higher than girls, and also that boys increase with age. So this is just from 10 to 19 years of age. So while suicide rates are higher among boys than girls, girls have higher rates of suicide ideation than boys and attempts of suicide. And the reason being that boys typically use more lethal means. So guns versus girls using pills and poisoning. Now, nationally, suicide rates have increased since 1999 through 2014, which is the latest years we have available in terms of data. So there's been great annual percentage increases after 2006. So what we see, and these are suicide rates, right? So rates telling us something about how quickly disease is occurring. And what we know is that in the second half of the decade, rates increased. The average annual percent increase in the age-adjusted suicide rate was about 1% per year from 1999 through 2006, but increased to 2% per year from 2006 to 2014. Now the age-adjusted, right, so we just went through age-adjusted and crude. These numbers are age-adjusted, right? So it helps us take out some of the demographic differences that could be in these underlying populations specifically. Okay, so here we were showing you how suicide rates are higher among older men, older boys. So this comparison wouldn't make sense if these were all 19-year-old boys and these were all, say, 11-year-old, right? So 11, we're at less than maybe one per 100,000, and 19, we're at 18 per 100,000. So age adjustment is taking out any of those demographic differences. Now the percent increase in the age-adjusted suicide rate was greater for females, 45%, than for males, which was 16%. after from 1999 to 2014. So 17.8 to 20.7 is a 16% increases versus 4 to 5.8 is a 45% increase. And again, what we see here, right, is that males have much higher suicide rates than females. Now let's take a look at just the females. So this is just suicide rates for females by different age groups. Suicide rates for females were highest for those in the age 45 to 64 group. So the dark green line is 1999, the light green line is 2014. This age group had one of the highest percent increases, so the change from 6 to 9.8%. Now, suicide rates in 2014 were higher for all age groups, except for those 75 years and older. So what does that, what does that mean? Well, if we look here, the dark green line, so this is 1999 versus the light green line, is always lower, right? Dark green is lower than light green, so we see a jump in 2014 for all these age groups, except down here for the 75 and older group. This next slide shows us suicide rates for males. And in both 1999 and 2014, suicide rates were highest among men aged 75 and older, which is different than what we saw for women, right? For women, it was 45 to 64-year-olds. For men, the highest rates are 75 and older. In contrast to the other age groups, though, for men, the suicide rate by this demographic group decreased. So it was actually higher. So dark blue is 1999, light blue is 2014, and it was actually higher in 1999 than in 2014. And all these other age groups, though, we see an increase. So 45 to 64, it's increased. So from 1999, we have an increase in 2014. 1999 is lower than in 2014 for all age groups except 75 and older. All right, so the last slide is suicide deaths by method and sex. So on the left, we have women. On the right, we have men. 1999, 2014 for women, 1999, 2014 for men. I'm going to pause. Sorry guys, just pausing while that announcement's taking on. So if you heard that, then you now know that I'm sitting in an airport while I'm recording this. The percentage of suicides involving firearms and poisoning declined from 1999 to 2014. So poisoning is the light blue, firearms is the dark blue, and each year you see a decline. So 36.9 down to 31, 61.7 down to 55 for firearms. So for men in 2014, more than half of the suicide deaths were by firearm. For women, it was about a third. The largest for women was actually poisoning, so 34.1%. All right, so what do we know about the risk factors for suicide? And what do we know about causal factors? Well, in terms of what causes suicide, we actually don't know anything. In terms of what increases the risk for suicide, we know quite a bit. So family history of suicide increases the risk. Family history of child maltreatment increases the risk. Previous suicide attempts, having a history of mental disorders, particularly clinical depression, having a history of alcohol and substance abuse, having feelings of hopelessness, having impulsive or aggressive tendencies. Cultural and religious beliefs can actually increase the risk factors for suicide, can increase the risk of suicide, and particularly if there's a belief that suicide is a noble resolution of some sort of personal dilemma. And isolation, a feeling of being cut off from other people, can increase the risk of suicide. I'm going to talk about local epidemics of suicide and how those increase the risk factor in the next couple slides. So there's evidence suggesting that suicide can be contagious, and I've got contagious in quotes here, right? In the same sense that behaviors can be contagious, right? So if you hang out with people who smoke, maybe you start to smoke. Media coverage is actually thought to be part of the problem when it comes to suicide epidemics. And when I'm saying suicide epidemics, what I'm talking about, you can think of in as sort of a foodborne outbreak, right? What we see sometimes are these clusters of suicide epidemics. And some countries have actually come up with recommendations for reporting in the media in order to make suicide look maybe less sexy than other countries would report on suicide. So in the US, recent suicide clusters, there was a cluster of suicide among junior and seniors in Palo Alto, California. And it was thought to be tied to high levels of school stress. Now, earlier we talked about how Native Americans and American Indians have higher rates of suicide. On the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota, there was nine young adolescents and adults aged 12 to 24 in a 5-month period this year who had committed suicide. So to summarize this information, suicide is increasing against the backdrop of generally declining mortality. So as the population ages, as we get better medicine, overall mortality is declining. However, for suicide, as we saw here, mortality is actually increasing. And suicide is one of the top 10 leading causes of death. Now, while the rate increased almost steadily over the period, the average annual percent increase was greater for the second half of the period, 2006 to 2014, than for the first half. So that means that so this is the rate, it's telling us about the speed of disease development, and it's increasing. So this could actually increase. So we went from a 1% increase every year up to 2006 to a 2% increase after 2006. The last thing is that there's a lot of disparities that exist by race, gender, and age. Okay, so your in-class assignments for today. The first thing that I want you to do is to take at least 20 minutes and answer questions 1A through 1C. And review the example on page 11 if you get stuck. You're going to have to, I think that you'll probably get stuck on the table in 1A, but what you should do is look at the table in table 2B on page 11. Let me flip over to that to show you what I'm talking about. So screen share, I'm changing my screen. All right, so this is the document I'm talking about, measures of frequency. And this is the table. Table 2B is going to help you figure out how you're going to complete table 1A. The next, all right. And I'm going to pause here and pick up so there'll be a part 3 to this.